So, this is a weird one. This is a weird one. And I'd like to clarify that by saying this is weird. Okay? This is how the frigate did this happen is my starting point. Because the question isn't, my room does look an absolute tip. And this is because while I was away, my office was used as a junk drop because we were supposed to be moving this week. And I was supposed to be recording in here. Instead, the move is now scheduled for beginning of August, hopefully. Fingers crossed if all the paperwork is signed on time. Please, 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 please. And I've got to record not only some videos which were recorded supposed to cover July, because they've got sound issues, thanks to what I think might be my neighbour's radio, where they've got a lovely classic old radio that does produce static, which seems to spark off the microphone somehow. And also some for August. So wish me luck, and I will slowly get this cleaned up. Slowly get this cleaned up being the operative, because I also seem to spend half my life on the phone to lawyers. But leaving that all to one side, how the frigate did this happen? USA and Venezuela versus UK, Germany and Italy in 1903. That is the title I'm going with. How the frigate did this happen? Because, as I'll be explaining, there are numerous reasons not to go to war, and there are numerous the vast majority of factions in this do not want to go to war. In fact, for me to make it actually happen, an alternate history, so to speak, where it does happen and what therefore would happen in the world and how it impact the world, it comes furiously close to me disallowing this because it's no longer alternate history, it's just fiction. I have to really accentuate some actions and factions, and primarily I have to pick one of the two stabilizing powers to make it happen in. And the trouble is, if you go one way with one of the stabilizing nations involved, it won't go the other. So, because this is the setup, this question is exactly USA and Venezuela versus UK, Germany and Italy, I have to do it in such a way that that is the way it ends up lining up. Which means I have to be very specific about which stabilizing nation I pick to go, no. And the stabilizing nations in this scenario are USA, UK, and Italy. Germany is justifying its navy, and whilst there are many in Germany who are going, what the frigate are we doing? There are enough that there is enough going on that they are prepared to be a bit pushy. Mostly they're kept under control by the British, though, and that's one of the reasons why the British are there and the strength they are. They want their money back. They don't want a war over it. Wars cost money, and it's the same with Venezuela. They are trying to not pay their money. In fact, this entire incident can be put down to Venezuela doesn't want to pay its bills, therefore it goes crying to the USA. And there's going to be someone who's going to go, well, you know, these bills were unfair and all these things. The point is, if you are developing a nation, if you are wanting to improve it, you need to get money from somewhere. You can either get it from taxes, but if you don't have a tax base, then your only issue is to take on loans. And the trouble is, when you want to take on loans, you have to pay them back. That might seem strange, but you have to pay them back. Even between nation states, you have to pay them back. The whole idea of, well, you know, that person's rich, so I don't need to pay them back. No, that doesn't work. You took their money. the contract was signed, and for nation states that's even more problematic because, as a rule, if you decide you're not going to take on the contracts of former governments when you take over that nation state, and you're not going to pay the bills they ran up, then you're going to find it's very hard for you to get loans because you've wrecked your credit, and usually you have to go to the same people to get money and arrange to get the money. And there is a reason you go to them. They're usually the ones who are happy to give you money and have the money to give you in the first place. And all money, doesn't matter where it comes from, comes with strings. That's that old phrase, the borrower is slave unto the lender. It's not quite that scenario. But the borrower certainly has to abide by the lender. And they have more freedom while as long as they're repaying on time. Stop repaying. Well, if you're a normal person, you take a loan from a bank. In the UK, there'll probably be a county court judgment against you, and bailiffs turn up. When you're a nation state, what's your equivalent of bailiffs? But the point is, no one involved really wanted to go to war over Venezuela, other than perhaps the Venezuelans, historically. You see, it starts with Vice President Juan Vicente Gomez and President Cipriano Castro, who honestly are... Look, I have often said there are many military people who have fine military minds who have absolutely no understanding of economics. And if ever you have seen what can happen when you decide your qualification for being in charge of procurement, let's say, is pure military experience rather than... You have military experience. Do you have any skill in procurement? Any experience in logistics and economics? And no, I'm a very, very fine infantryman, or I'm a very fine artilleryman, or I'm a very fine naval officer. Or pilot. Usually at that point is when I start going, oh. Now, I like people who serve in the armed forces. I have spent quite a lot of my life around them. Goodness knows I have come very close to actually... I'm a weird enough case. I've done enough weird things that I have honestly blurred the edges far more than anyone probably should. There are pictures. But leaving that to one side, I would also say that there is sometimes a very strong idea of people in people that, you know, because you've had military service, you therefore understand how to run and organize things because you've been in the military, and that's all about organization. It's all about logistics, and therefore you should be definitely in charge of military things. And then you're going to be very good at running things and organizing things, and therefore you're going to make a natural leader for a nation state. And the reality is, some are very good, but a lot aren't, because they aren't the same skill sets. They really aren't. And usually the ones who are very good at it are the ones who have the skill set of leadership, whereby they have a habit of bringing in experts and listening to them, and then forming a plan based on the advice of multiple experts in their field. The ones who tend to turn out to be bad, and this goes for pretty much anything in life, tend to be the ones who believe that they are God's gift to humanity, and they know because of a font of knowledge, because they know. Unfortunately, both of these gentlemen, Gomez and Castro, have the latter personality persuasion. And they honestly believed that because of the Monroe Doctrine, they could not pay debts and America would protect them from the consequences. Interestingly enough, in 1902-3, it was Britain, Italy, and Germany which were suffering the most from this and not paying. But by 1905, it was America and France as well, who he wasn't paying. And Castro really didn't understand why the Americans objected to him not paying. He didn't understand that at all. So you see, there's a small problem here. You at least, usually, at least if you're going to play this game, do not pay your benefactor and protector. You at least make sure if there's any bill, you're going to... It's like... What was that old piece of advice? If you've got 2 bills you have to pay, if you need your car to go to work, pay your car, and you can only afford to pay one, pay your car bill, because you can sleep in your car but not in your house, but you can't drive your house to work. If you don't need your car to go to work, always pay your house bill, followed by your house and home insurance, because those are 2 things matter. Then your utilities, then your car bill, because that's the differential. Car bill goes first if you need your car to get to work, if it's the absolutely vital thing for getting work. If it's not, then house goes first, and then it's house insurance. If you can't afford to pay all your bills, there are things which are better to lose than others. I.e., in the summer you can possibly afford to have your heating cut off, but you can't afford to have your electricity cut off. That sort of thing. You don't want to have either cut off, and frankly, no, you really should try and avoid getting in that situation. But life happens. Shit happens. But it's the same with nation states. Okay? You have to balance when you've taken those loans out to develop your country and you're going through the payments. If you cannot make the payments, and by the end of this, poor Venezuela is making the payments and losing a lot of money to do so, a lot more money than it would have cost them to make the payments. That's a real problem. That's the other thing with this particular historical game of brinkmanship, is that the end result does not go Venezuela's way. You have to be sensible when you're structuring which ones you pay. And I would say in this scenario, if Venezuela had kept paying America and Britain and made sure their bankers were happy, then the rest of the world could probably have gone wandering. Because as long as America and Britain are getting what they want, they're going to make sure no one interferes with them. And there's a reason I'm saying this, because the reality was the Monroe Doctrine from, well, technically it's articulated first in 1823. But it's actually been tacitly enforced by the British since 1815 because of the British informal empire in South America. So, and it's not as if the US Navy was strong enough to do it. So as long as Castro had kept paying the money to the British and the Americans, Britain and America, no one would have interfered. No one had done anything. Because Britain would have just gone, no. Oh, are you having trouble getting coal supplies to get to Venezuela? Oh, I'm so sorry. Appears we must have ordered too much. There's not enough for you to do it. Oh, it's terrible. Sorry, Germany. There are so many different ways to go for it. It's all about money and prestige. And there are all sorts of issues in this particular scenario. And really, I should probably do a full video on the Venezuelan crisis, because it's quite so intricately stupid how it's managed on at least one side, and the Americans and the Brits are almost from the get-go sitting there going, International Tribunal, International Tribunal, International Tribunal, get your heads down, International Tribunal, down Germany, down Italy. Why are you here as well? You just tag along for fun. You can help us? Oh, good. Okay. And America's sort of going to Venezuela. Really? Actually, I have this great quote coming up from Roosevelt, which I'll be talking about when I get there. But basically, he says in 1901, if any South American country misbehaves towards any European country, let the European country spank it. And this is the trouble, because whilst the Monroe Doctrine is there and is a big major part of American philosophy, by this point they're already pissed off with it. The Americans don't even like the Monroe Doctrine, because this is what happens. Countries don't want to pay their bills, they get called in. They don't want anyone invading, they don't want Germany setting up a colony in Venezuela or something like that. No one wants that. The British don't want that, the Americans don't want that. Americans are looking at the Brits going, do you want Venezuela as a colony? And the Brits are going, why? Why? The nicest way, we've already got the decent gold mines from that area. We made sure that in the previous treaty. Why do we want Venezuela? Have you met the local warlords? We don't want anything to do with them. And of course, the poor people on the ground, the workers and the people living there, they're just the playthings of everyone in this. But that has ever been the case. I know there's lots of people who say, well, why wasn't there a People's Revolution in Game of Thrones and those sort of things? Well, as a rule, revolutions only tend to work when you're able to get the means of firepower. And as happened in Games of Thrones, I'm fairly sure the closest thing to a People's Revolution which was being put forward which was definitely not by the People's Revolution, the Church, kind of got a bad case of being blown up. Again, firepower tends to count. So, for all this, the Americans are sort of being pushed to be actually involved because of their domestic political standing, and Roosevelt will later claim that he forced the Germans to back down by sending his own fleet to threaten war with the Germans if Germans landed. However, this kind of forgets the fact that, whilst yes, he sent a larger fleet than the Germans, there was a larger fleet than them, much larger, sitting not far away, going, both you are going to play sensibly now. No one pushed his goalposts. Now, the British basically have a two-stage plan in this scenario. The British have some ships in the actual ports, taking part in the blockade and doing actual duties, and the Italians are there. The British send 8 warships compared to the Germans 4 into that area. But then again, there's a far larger British force sitting back in the Caribbean, under the technically attached to the North American and West Indies station. And the British ships were under the command of Commodore Robert A.J. Montgomery, who is a particularly interesting gentleman who goes on to become a Rear Admiral and has a lot of history with the Royal Navy as being a very useful diplomatic officer. And he'd spent much of his career dealing with the Newfoundland fisheries, which meant he had a lot of experience dealing with the Americans and other nations. So he was not randomly picked. It was not a case of, oh, we don't know who we're going to send. Who would we pick? Who will we send? No. It was a case of, we are forming a particular service squadron. We are putting Commodore Montgomery in charge. And that is going to be it. And again, it was similar with other forces involved. Roosevelt likes to claim a lot, but honestly, there is no evidence of any ultimatums, and whilst the Germans were being the Germans, the British were going out of their way that they wanted arbitration, and they didn't want to undermine relations with the Americans because, frankly, it wasn't worth it. The Anglo-American relationship at this point was developing quite nicely. There was a lot of very interesting things going on there, and as said, and this is the point you should be remembering, the British had actually wanted the Monroe Doctrine to be a joint declaration. Basically, the Monroe Declaration is declared in December 1823. From about 1824 onwards, for about the next 10 years, the British keep making overtures along the lines of, would you like to make the Monroe Doctrine a joint declaration? Would you like to make it really joint? Would you like to have us make this a joint declaration? Please? And the Americans are going, no, War of 1812. No, War of 1812. And the British are going, who cares about the War of 1812? The entire purpose of the Treaty of Ghent was we didn't give a flying hoot. It's over. It's done. Let's make this a joint declaration and keep everyone else out of South America. That'll be brilliant. The Americans are going, no. And the British are going, do you realise who's actually enforcing the Monroe Doctrine? And the Americans go, yes, but War of 1812. And the British are going, this is a bit of a stuck record. This is called realpolitik. Shall we make it a joint declaration? No, it never becomes a joint declaration, but it becomes very, very close to being one. And in practice, as said, it's basically enforced from 1815 till about 1915 entirely by the British. The Americans are just about strong enough to start doing it from about 1915 onwards, and they actually had the basing and infrastructure to support that kind of operation. But that is a whole other history point. It's quite sad at some points. It is really quite sad at some points. And when we carry on, shameless book plug. Yes, I have this in every video, and it matters. It matters. So if you don't want to see it, please skip forward a couple minutes. But why do I do this in every video? Because I'm a British academic. Because, well, this is what I returned home to, because I didn't open the subfolder I have in my Google email account until of whenever universities contact me, they go into that folder. While I was traveling, I like to switch off from it because honestly, I need a break from it sometimes. With the other stuff going on. Literally, I came back and there were emails from 3 universities, 4 emails in total. And I kid you not, one of the there was an email which was sent at 12:05 midday on like Thursday before I came home from the Scandi ship trip, which said, "We're very sorry, Alex, but again, you've come second in our in our post this year. We just feel that the person we've hired is a better fit for our research program and is a far better person for us to work with in research basis going forward. However, we very much appreciated your application and your interview, and you're lovely." Okay. Alright. And I wasn't not expecting that, but I still applied for the permanent position because it would be nice to have. It's at a university which I could have quite easily got to, and it's actually a part-time permanent position, so you know, I could have done that. It wouldn't have been that difficult for me to get to from where I'm going to be in Cornwall. It's a couple of hours on the train. It's really not that difficult for me. If I've got to be in there 2 days a week, that's not going to worry me. That's not the sort of thing that's going to worry me as a commute. Literally, they sent that email at 12:05. The email I received 12:20 said, "On talking with the candidate we've hired, however, we would like to again offer you the lecturing of the 3 key modules and these are the key lectures which we were recruiting for. We'd like to offer you the contract post at this rate. Da 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 da. So once again in the UK, hiring someone to teach core modules apparently. And they've hired someone who can't teach the modules, but has got great research for it. I love it. But no, the fact that I keep getting through to these interviews and I get as high as I do in the process is because of all of you, because you're buying my books, because there are more books coming, because of the work I get to do, thanks to your support for the channel, thanks to your support for my research through Patreon, thanks to all the stuff I'm doing, thanks to all of you. So, thank you. Thank you. And that actually caused the most fun. And this is a good example of British academia. Explaining the funding objectives and talking it through. And they're going, well, you know, you haven't applied for this grant or this grant recently. And I went, those grants are about £500 if they give you the full amount of money. And they rarely do. And writing a grant application is a 2 to 3 day process. And I went, yes, but that's a lot of money for an academic. And I went, I don't need to compete for those. There are grants I'm still applying for, but thanks to all your support, we fundraised the Scandi ship trip. Why would I want to spend that time on writing a grant application where I'll be up against several thousand applicants and I probably won't get it, when I can deliver something nicer for the people who are supporting Scandi ship, or the rest of you, and do something which is going to be nice for my patrons and supporters, because that makes far more sense to me. They really don't understand that one, but no. Anyway, thank you for all your support is basically what I'm saying, and thank you for everyone who's buying this book and everyone who's buying stuff from the channel's shop, etc. and those things. It's very kind of you, and it really does support things. And I'm about to be dive bombed by a fly, I think. Flygon. So how could this happen? And yeah, I'm going to reiterate, how the frigate does this happen in the first place? This actually is what caused me, before I went away on the Scandi ship trip, to spend a lot of time going through a lot of books, trying to figure out exactly what happened. And please note, the actual working title of this PowerPoint was USA and Germany Go Stupid in 1903. This is how I think about how this scenario. The fact that it can happen worried me, that there was enough evidence. And basically, the fact is there were some people, still around this point, who felt that Secretary Seward's strategy was a good idea. And they didn't want to just use it to unify the USA, i.e. in the Civil War setting, and Seward was, of course, Lincoln's Secretary of State. No, that they had the idea that they could produce the new United America. And I'm using one of the many, many different phrases used to describe, but there were various people who had these ideas of creating a united America, which would be the entirety of North, South, Central America, Caribbean, all of that would be one state. All would be one nation with one government. And there are even ideas that they might have to move the government from Washington because it wouldn't be well located for all of it, but it needed to be a defensible site, remember, and needed to have good sea access. So, yeah, there was actually one particularly interesting scenario for that, because someone actually had the idea that maybe this whole United America should have its capital should be Houston, Texas. They felt that was a good place to go for, because it would have the sea access, it would have all the things it needs, but also would be a defensible location, and would be, whilst not central located, would be centrally economically located, was their idea. Don't get me started. I to research this, I went to some very weird places on the internet, is all I can say, and I found some books which I am not recommending to anyone, because I would never suggest anyone to read that. It was some of the worst writing I have read in my life. It was terrible. Oh, good lord. Yeah, we're not getting in there. But there were people who had this idea, and there were some of them actually involved in politics, and some people putting forward the ideas, so they are there. They are there. And so, pretty much, if instead of the US Navy picking pretty much their best and brightest captains for the ships going down to deal with the situation, if they picked their dumbest, most intransient ones, that's going to cause an issue. And why am I picking America being the one here? Well, because I'm honestly not sure if Britain goes weird that Germany and Italy follow Britain. And there's also the problem that for Britain to get involved, it's going to have to bring the Empire involved. And there is so much at risk with Canada, etc., even in this scenario, that you have to push it very, very far, to the point at which you have to not only make them act ahistorically and have to push factions to the top that were very, very far from the top, but you have to make them completely and utterly strategically moribund. I mean, they are absolutely pointless. So I'm sorry, America has to be the stability power which goes nuts. There is just no other way to make it work. And actually make it work as it is, without you writing complete fiction. Trust me, one of the worst and strangest books I found was a British one, which would have been an argument for it. But the trouble is, that book wasn't published till 1950, and it was ignored massively then, and frankly the author was never really seen. However, the fact I found the book still disturbs me, but it shows you how good and how high quality the librarians of King's College London and various other universities are, in the UK, that when I reach out to my friends in the university library world, they can find me these tomes and find me digital copies to read. It's either they are very, very nice people, or they are secretly trying to destroy my soul. I know I'm going off on one here, and I do apologize, but it was annoying. It was bad to read. And basically the idea was, if you send down the most intransigent and dumb commanders, a situation soon arises where there's a fight between a German and American ship. And even this, look, if there's just firing between the Germans and the Americans, the British will probably just go, shut up, both of you. Stop it now. The idea was, you create such a situation, America drives them away, and they cause the whole of the Americans to unite behind them, and they become this united America. However, how does that cause a war without the British telling you something? Well, there is a small scenario. The British have a habit of parking their ships between the Americans and the Germans. They have that habit on purpose. Now, they don't necessarily perfectly cover each other, so you can still try and aim and not hit the British ship. But if, let's say, the Americans fired first, because reacting to, let's say, German heavy-handedness, and the Americans then back themselves into a corner and they fire, and they hit a British ship instead, and then refuse to apologise, that's when you start to have problems. That's when you start to have a lot of problems. Because, you see, if if the Americans don't apologise for hitting a British ship, the British public are going to be in uproar. The British government's going to have to do something. At that point, there is scenarios where it can get worse. I.e., someone could try to invade Canada. It would have to be literally that, because the British are going to, and everyone else going into this really wants a negotiated settlement. That is the problem. You have to do a scenario where one side is being completely ahistorically intransient. And the thing is, the Americans have a form from this for the War of 1812. Let's be honest, they do have form for it, more recently at this point than the other nations in this kind of scenario. And Britain can afford to ignore a lot, but it gets worse the more damage the Americans have done. If that firing degenerated into a general fight, and the British ship, there was a loss of life, or it was sunk, and there was a loss of life, and then a senior politician makes a big thing about how great it is and how powerful it shows the Americans are, then they've backed themselves into a corner and they've backed the Brits into a corner. And it could cause war. But for this to happen, you honestly need to avoid having this man anywhere near power, and a lot of others, because you have to remember, Roosevelt is a historian of the War of 1812. No, I don't agree with all this historical analysis of it, and no, it's really interesting in some of its claims, but it's quite a thorough history, and it's also quite a thorough understanding of the realities of naval diplomacy and what you're going to be dealing with. This means, actually, Roosevelt is not a person you want anywhere near power. You pretty much have to change the American leadership. You have to make sure the factions of the more extreme, harder line political parts of the American political scenario are in power. Which is kind of weird. And I know someone at this point is going to try and go, well, hang on, what about when the Germans bombarded Fort San Carlos and, Panther had to withdraw and they sent a large ship to do it? You have to remember that action was not approved by the British commander, and pretty much the British stamped on that so hard with the Germans that the Germans were left quivering. It was interesting, and that is probably what caused Roosevelt to, make his provide with the basis of his later claims that, he told the German ambassador, and he had, that Admiral Dewey had orders to ready sail to Venezuela from Puerto Rico at an hour's notice. And probably they were not too worried by that, because Dewey is a good commander and he has a good force with him. But compared to what's sitting in the Caribbean, if it looks like he's going to be causing trouble, he will arrive with an escort. And that's the point. That's how the British run these things. There is the whole thing of, why does the Great White Fleet not visit Britain when you're showing off the world your naval power? Because the British would have, out of just sheer need to do so, would have probably had it escorted up by the combined home and channel fleets, maybe some of the Mediterranean fleet as well, just to make the point. And it would have found itself with 2 lines of battleships, equaling in length, one on either side of it, going, "Hello, we're escorting you." This is one of the reasons, again, why the Americans really don't want it. So you have to, you have to change things quite a lot. And if you changed it to the British wanting a war and wanting to go to war with Venezuela, you have to A, make Venezuela more attractive, and B, you have to also give the British a strategic rationale for it. Does a joint war alongside Germany make them better allies? We tried that, Opium Wars. It didn't. Opium Wars and the various Boxer Rebellion stuff, it didn't work. The Germans weren't coming back from the course they'd set themselves on. There were attempts. So yeah, that's not going to happen. And again, Roosevelt is far too sensible. There is a reason he says Dewey. He says Dewey has orders to be ready to sail from Venezuela to Puerto Rico at an hour's notice. He doesn't say has orders to be able to sail at an hour's notice. He has ready to sail at an hour's notice. And there is a whole lot of naval phraseology in that, but there's also a whole lot of wiggle room. So, if we have to get rid of Roosevelt, that means we probably have to get rid of McKinley as well. Because let's be honest, they're both Republicans, and McKinley again was fairly smart. McKinley's death sets up Roosevelt, but because Roosevelt starts as his vice president, hence this quote's from when he was vice president. And that leads us to a problem. Now, historically, the Democrats choose William Jennings Bryan to run against McKinley. Both times. In 1896 and 1900. And he's terrible, okay? He is a good speaker. He's a good campaigner. He's just not a good candidate. He doesn't even win Nebraska, which is his home state. That's a problem if you're a Democrat. But historically, the Democrats were more infused in this period with the idea of the United Americas than the Republicans. So you'd have to pick. You'd have to have had a harder line Southern Democrat somehow successfully beat McKinley and Roosevelt in 1900 for the election. That's the only chance you have of setting this up. But the trouble is, the Democrats don't tend to like to invest in spending on the Navy. So, this just gets more and more fun. This just gets more and more fun. But I'm not going to go fishing around for names, because then I am definitely getting into a lot of fiction, because I would have to go through all the governors and senators who might have a chance. There are about 3 or 4 of them. Historically don't go anywhere. Historically they really don't get anywhere because they are really bad. Who are the ones who subscribe up to this sort of policy and pick one of those and go, David be president. But that's going to change so much. Yeah. But that's pretty much what you need to do to set this up. This is good alternate history because it shows the reality of the situation. And so it's a good alternate history of this thing discussed of why does war not happen? Why are America and Britain so not keen on this idea? For Britain it's because they really don't want anything. They've got all they want in South America and in North America. They don't want anything more. There's nothing else worth having. If there was, they'd have had it. It's been that kind of 19th century for them. For the Americans, well, let's start off with what are the balance of forces involved, shall we? Now, this particular set of details comes from the USN called a Naval Heritage and Naval History and Heritage Command, and there's their wiki, their web link. It is interesting. I have literally copied and pasted the table and the notes underneath it, so that is all there for you. As you can see, they have 11 battleships, 19 cruisers, 6 monitors, 16 destroyers, 27 torpedo boats, 8 submarines, 29 steel gunboats, 26 auxiliaries, all sorts of things. They have a total force of 175 by December 1903. And, you know, that's an adequate scenario. And Venezuela has some troops. And let's be honest, the US Army is not well deployed for a northern war, or not that well numbered. And you have to remember, under this scenario, and I will point this out, okay, the British Army is not massive. and they have got the arm in India, etc. But this scenario has involved adding in the German and the Italians to the British side. There are a lot of soldiers. There are a lot of soldiers available. A lot of soldiers available. So invading Canada could lead to could end up with some very interesting results for the Americans. And there could be some very interesting things for America itself. Broadly speaking, and I am giving you rough numbers because the British and the Germans are kind of in the early stages of, well, when I say early stages, the not so early stages, because they started in in the 1890s, of the Anglo-German naval race and naval build-up, and that particular quantitative competition. So the British have roughly 31 battleships in commission that I would say are capable of going off, and 15 in ordinary, roughly, which are capable of actually going and taking part in a war. And if you're going to sit there and tell me, well, this old British battleship could not fight this modern American battleship. No, it couldn't. You are right. It would be beaten by that modern American battleship. But with roughly 4-to-1 numbers, I don't think the American battleships would have much of a chance in this scenario. And again, I've used Naval History Net, I've used Hansard, I've used all sorts of sources to put together the British fleet, because it's quite expansive, and there is debate exactly of where ships are, when they are, what they're doing. Armoured first-class cruisers, roughly 18 commissioned, possibly as many as 38 in ordinary, in various states of capability in ordinary. Other cruisers, possibly 40 commissioned and 70 in ordinary. Again, this is also a period of transition where you've got stuff being transferred with the Australians and other of the Dominion native fleets are sort of growing and have ships. And I've put roughly 160 destroyers there because theoretically there's 8 flotillas with roughly 20 ships per flotilla. But those 20 vessels can be in various states of repair and commissioning within the flotillas. As well as that, the British have other individual boat destroyers running around doing all sorts of things, and torpedo boats running around doing all sorts of things. So I'm going to go with 160 because the numbers keep coming in around that figure, but it does vary from 150 up to 180. So I've been very much on the conservative side, going for 160. Submarines. Technically in 1903 there's only 6. Technically, by 1904, very early in 1904, that's doubled. And there is a lot more under construction. And again, you're talking about the Royal Navy. They've already got 3 submarine depot ships, sort of, in service by 1903 that are doing that role and being fitted to that role. And the problem really comes from the fact the British have been preparing for war since about 1890 against the Germans and against the French and against the Russians. And the British have been building a lot. And let's be honest, whilst we'd like to talk about the various concessions of the cost efficiencies put forward by Jackie Fisher, those haven't happened yet at this point. And whilst, yes, you can point to some of the American ships and go, they are far better and far more newer than what the British have. They are. But again, the British have a lot more. And on top of that, we can then add in the Germans with a further 12 fairly modern battleships capable of this. 3 armoured cruisers, 8 protected cruisers, 18 unprotected light cruisers wandering around. The Kaiserlich Marine is also starting to feel the benefits of the Navy laws and is growing itself. There is a lot of... One of the big problems is if this war conflict lasts into 1904, then the balance of forces get even worse for the Americans, because the amount of ships arriving in the Royal Navy, the Kaiserliche Marine, and other fleets in the European waters in 1904 is simply absurd. There are a lot of ships coming. There are a lot of ships. The Americans' build-up doesn't really start until Roosevelt's been president for a while. That's the problem. And in this scenario, he ain't even getting to be vice president. So who knows what's happened. Now, admittedly, there are some interesting Democrat senators around, including a certain Tillman, who really likes naval spending. So there will definitely be naval spending going on. But is it naval spending that you wanted for this kind of conflict? Because is it walk softly, carry a big stick naval spending? Or is it, well, cruisers are what can be built in Charleston Navy Yard, so we're going to get some cruisers? There's a question going on. But the point is, you're already at the stage at which there is now 48 battleships. Well, no, hang on. That's 58 battleships on one side and 11 on the other. And so, yeah, they won't deploy all of them. This is the point. This war would not involve all of them being deployed. And, you know, the fact that it then gets up to, well, somewhere in the region of 63 battleships across the three major powers. Yeah. And yes, you might look at this this San Bon class and think, well, we can definitely beat them if we're the Americans. You can do. But the point is, can your cruisers beat them? And while you're engaging and beating this, what is it that you're not fighting that is currently hitting you? That is your problem, because you can either go in and go, right then, these are our equivalents, we need to muller them first, and then you ignore ships like this, and you have to remember, their guns aren't that bad. They're going to be firing at you. Or you going to go with the idea of, we're going to wipe out the small fry first. And that's if you have a big battle. You're most likely not going to have a big battle. Most likely what you ended up with is a load of small squadron actions, etc. Because especially if the Allies go with a war plan of, the European Allies go with a war plan of blockade, well, wherever your fleet is, your largest fleet is, they're going to find themselves facing the largest, most modern ships. But wherever your fleet isn't, these ships are going to be perfectly adequate for absolutely tearing up your ports. And this is before we start considering the whole infrastructure advantage the British have of having the global infrastructure they have, so they can have ships from the China station, let's say, where they've got a fairly large chunk of some battleships, wander across the Pacific and say, hello. What about your newly acquired Philippines territory? You know, Cuba, all these things. The classic British policy in wartime is to hoover up all your islands. So, whilst I'm fairly certain, once we get to the discussion, I'll be explaining it, the British would dictate a policy of blockade. It would be British-style blockade from Napoleonic Wars, whereby all foreign territories, or all colonies, all islands you own, they're going to be ours by the end of this. And that's the real point. They're going to be ours. I do have to say, though, I do love the fact that the McKinley, when he and Roosevelt were running their election campaign in 1900, they ran on the slogan, "Promises have been kept." I mean, how many politicians have ever been able to run on that? Shipshape. So, still going, the crowdfunder. It's still, if you want to see the behind the scenes stuff and some of the things we got up to, especially the discussion with Paradox over Hearts of Iron 4, and I think some Vicky Free gets in there, Victoria Free, and a few other things get in there. please, please go along. Support the shipshape group, because again, these events happen, and we can do the research stuff and the trips we do to Scandinavia, the trip we're planning for next year to Japan, the trips we're planning for some of the future trips, the Hanseatic League one, the Crusader Islands one in the Mediterranean, all these things, because of your support. We can do them because of your support, and that is a really important thing. Without your support, it doesn't happen. Because, to put in the words of Drak, he has to be really careful about what's probably going to make financial sense for him. His life, he is supported entirely by his channel. And he has to be quite sensible sometimes, because that's his lifeline. That's his job. That's his, and the trips we do on these big trips, when we go away on the Scandinavia, they are made possible by you basically underwriting the major costs of transport, i.e. the flights there and back and those sort of things, and the hotels, because that means then we're only paying our daily expenses, and therefore for us, as far as we're concerned, we can afford to do the videos because they are going to interest people, and they're going to, not because they going to introduce millions of people, they're going to make thousands of pounds in revenue of advertising budget from YouTube. No. But are they good history? Are they great history? Are they history we want to share with the world because we want to shine more light on this? Yes. But as I said before myself on the trip, and I'm not sure if this was recorded for anyone or not, if you wanted to make a 1 million viewership video for YouTube, you'd do Iowa versus Bismarck, how Bismarck could have won the battle. And that's guaranteed to get 1 million views. Pretty much guaranteed, baked in. Add in some cool graphics from UAD or something like that. Yeah. That'll get the views. Completely unhistorical, because there is no way in my mind Iowa would lose under any circumstance to Bismarck. It would have to be being run by the most stupid captain known to mankind, and the most stupid gunnery crew known to mankind. But basically, yeah, that's guaranteed to get the views. Talking about Vashenko, which I'm planning a whole video about, and how she starts off the German U-boat program, probably won't. And talking about the Olympic, the British-built submarine sitting in Estonia, in Tallinn, Estonia, from 1930s, the only last remaining 1930s built British submarine in the world that's above water. You can go and see in Tallinn, Estonia. It's lovely. It's a mine layer based sort of on the U-class, but different enough that it's definitely its own class. And Småland. All these things, these glorious things. Yeah, they are a great piece of history, and we're sure people are going to enjoy them, but they are not going to make the YouTube algorithm sing. They just aren't. So they would never make the money to pay for their trip without your support through Shipshape. So what are the likely war aims? Oh, good lord. This is actually quite an interesting one. If the war aims... And I chose this lovely picture of, Roosevelt standing up for Domingo. And one of the things about Roosevelt is he's never shy at self-publication and about claiming how well he did do. So he's always good with that one. What are the likely war aims? Well, I said, for the Americans, it's to try and unite everyone behind them, to unite the Americas. For the other powers, it's going to be getting apologies and concessions from the Americans over their actions. And the Germans might have plans of more war aims than that, including a glorious repeat of the sacking of Washington that the British had done in in the War of 1812. But that's probably not in the British books. That won't be on the British list of war aims. British list of war aims is probably, yeah, everyone gets back to their pre-war starting positions, and all your territories are now ours. That are all your territories, as in islands like Cuba and Philippines, are, they might not even be British. The Brits might even give them to the British might give the Philippines to the Germans. They might do that on the grounds that then it's something we can easily nab in any major war. And then gives them a strategic weakness, or they're going to then have to deploy even more of their fleet out to the Far East, which means that's even more of their fleet which we can stop getting home and stop being part of their forces. They'd have to really have a very big East Asia squadron. And that's like Cuba. Depends what British relationships were with Spain, because returning Cuba to Spain would be a great thing if we wanted to get beneficial relations with Spain. Giving it to Portugal would be a great way of winding up Spain, and leaving it as a pro-British administration might be tempting. War aims are going to be confused. Because, honestly, this has started out as a we want you to pay your bills sort of war aim, and now there's a massive war over it, over honour. So war aims are going to be confused. Over honour and someone trying to use that dispute to rally the Americas to one flag. So here's the question then. Would the Austro-Hungarians, Spanish, French, Japanese, or Russians get involved? Well, that's a dandy little conversation to have. Would the Russians want to get involved? I'm not sure. They might not. They do like the position of being a world power, and this has been a great affront to world power, with the American ships firing on the British and refusing to apologise. It's gonna probably depend what France decides, and France might well decide that, frankly, if they don't join this, then they could end up with an Anglo-German alliance. And the best way to stop there being an Anglo-German alliance is to join that alliance. If you're French, if you decide, well, we want to be neutral, that's perfectly fine. That's a perfectly sensible aim to do. If you decide to join America, as, you know, we're going to join in on America's side, then you've got the fact that you'll be facing off against the Royal Navy and the German army and the Italian army in one go, and you have no allies. And you have a lot of exposed territories to lose. So neutral or joining the European alliance? Probably I would say join the European alliance, especially if it's naval power. If it's purely about naval, if you're purely talking naval deployment, you can join that war and send some naval units, and that's easy as anything. And it's the same for Russia. Send some naval units. The Spanish and the Austro-Hungarians are slightly more complicated. For the Spanish, that's their chance to get Cuba back. It's their chance to recover their lost territories. Joining the war could be incredibly advantageous because they will provide further, further reasonableness in some ways to the European side. And especially if the French do join, the Spanish joining becomes quite certain. And then that's going to expand and provide some legitimacy to the British, who are already going to be going after those islands. So American territories are going to be gone for. Any territories which are not American actual territory. The really interesting one comes down to Hawaii. The British, the Germans, the Americans have all been after Hawaii at various points. Have all considered it. So yeah, Hawaii is an interesting one here in this scenario, which could of course set up all sorts of interesting things. Japanese. Now, that was an interesting one to me, because of course the Anglo-Japanese alliance is not for another couple of years yet, but there is a great friendship already, because an alliance like that doesn't come from nowhere. There's already a great friendship going on between Britain and Japan, and for Japan, the old enemy is America. It really is. Commodore Perry did so much damage. I mean, he was trying to open up Japan, and I do understand his policies and why he did his logic behind his thinking, but he left a really bad taste in their mouth. And the Japanese don't have a massive fleet at this point, but they do have some interesting ships, and pretty much anything adding on to the British China station forces crossing the Pacific and attacking the west coast of the United States. That's going to cause trouble. That's going to cause problems for the Americans. So, yeah. Who do I think gets involved? I'm fairly certain the Japanese get involved. And the Austro-Hungarians, again, because, frankly, joining in with Germany and Italy is a no-brainer for them. Spanish, definitely if the French get involved, possibly anyway, they still get involved because of they're wanting to rewrite the experience of 1899, 1898, 1899. Honestly, that's going to cause trouble in America, because if the Democrats lose the the victory rewards that the Republicans gained during that war, then that's going to give them so many grounds, and you're probably going to see Roosevelt get elected in 1904 without any difficulty at all. And once he's in office, he's not leaving. He will do 2 full terms quite happily, which means he doesn't leave till 1912 at the earliest. He might decide to start hanging around longer, and that could change history dramatically. Honestly, this will be a mess. This is one of those points in time where you could end up with a lot of powers getting involved, because it serves their interest to get involved in what is going to be a limited war to show their power and their status. It becomes like the Boxer Rebellion scenario, and you have to remember the Boxer Rebellion involved an 8-nation alliance from Britain, Russia, Japan, France, Germany, USA, Italy, Austria-Hungary, the Netherlands, Spain, Belgium, and various other groups, other nations also sent personnel and also were part of it. So, yeah, you could end up with that alliance reforming, broadly speaking, without America, against America in this scenario. Especially if America is going full, get all the European interests, everyone out of South America, and you shouldn't get your money back if you invested in these things. It would be interesting. It would really be interesting to see what happened. And again, one of the interesting things, of course, remember that from that is that it was the British which built that alliance. The British used their political power. If the Americans have upset the British enough that they're using their political power, it's also a great way for the British to ensure they can fight this battle, commit all their forces, without being stabbed in the back. They don't have to worry. If they've got the French and the Russians and the Japanese and the Italians and the Austro-Hungarians all coming along with them, even if they're only sending token forces, all sending forces along with them, they're unlikely to face any trouble elsewhere in the world while they're dealing with it. And that's the that's the advantage of building such an alliance strategy. So, what are most likely to see? Blockade or invasion? Well, I would say blockade. It's going to be probably blockade. It's going to be War of 1812, Scott's Great Snake scenario all over again. There are some realities as well. If the Americans do decide to invade Canada, the Canadians might beat them off. They might not. But either way, you're probably going to see ground forces deployed from the Allied nations into Canada to help secure it. And that is going to be where you're going to see some very interesting scenarios go. Because once you have ground forces deployed into that area, it's going to be very tempting to start marching them. And if you've got a blockade, that means you're also able to reinforce them and supply them as long as they keep the coastal regions. If you're able to resupply your forces from sea and they stick to coastal regions, they can cause a lot of trouble. They basically march from port to port and set up their supply routes along those ports. Which, to an extent, could lead to some very interesting results in the Great Lakes area, etc. This could really work out bad for the Americans. The only thing I think that holds it back is the British will not want this to be an expanded war, and I'm fairly certain the Americans, rather like again with the War of 1812, the moment the rest of the political class not saying realizes what their government has got them into, but manages to wrest control from their government about what they've got themselves into, and manage to explain to the government that this is not a good long-term experience for them, you will see a massive backpedaling going on. A massive amount of of work going in to try and make this peaceful. And I think for that reason, I ultimately don't think it would be a very long war. I think it'd be a very quick war. I don't think we're going to have a chance to build up a lot of resources, a lot of forces, etc. in this place. No, I think it's going to be a 6 months maximum war. And a good 4 months of that is going to be because it's going to take time to negotiate the exact what they want. Which means, actually, the Americans might not lose that many foreign territories because it might take long enough to organise the personnel to take them. But there again, it also might not, because it's going to depend. What does the British Indian Ocean forces do? What does the Australian sort of station ships do? What do the troops in those areas do? How quickly do they get formed up, and how quickly do they send on the Philippines? Do the Japanese join them? That could be rather quick. And taking those territories could be seen as good positions to do for negotiations. Now, you also have to consider the fact that the Boxer Rebellion was a year long. Let's please be honest. It's October 1899 to September 1901. So technically, it's just under 2 years long. It's roughly 23 months long. So, yeah, it could be longer. It could be a year-long conflict. But again, I would not be surprised if it was very, very quick. If it was very, very much a case of, we really don't like what we've done. We really don't want to carry on doing this. We'd like to stop doing this. Please, can we find a way out of this? As quickly as possible. And so the likely result is Treaty of Ghent Round 2. What's going to be different this time is if the British and the European allies have taken those foreign territories, in which case basically America goes back. When I say foreign territories, I mean those non-America territories. There might also be probably won't be any restrictions on capital ship procurement or fleet procurement of the Americans. But it might well be a case of, no, you do not get to keep Cuba. You don't need to keep any territories outside of America. And as said, Hawaii is going to be an interesting one. You know, if they lose, if Cuba's given back to Spain, and the Philippines goes to Germany, and Hawaii, let's say, goes to Japan. That's a very big change to history. Might be something those countries want, because again, the Treaty of Ghent is between Britain and America, who are very happy to just go back to what it was beforehand. This time, the moment you've had other powers involved, you've added more voices at the table who are demanding stuff. And they want stuff. Whereas the British don't really want anything the Americans have, other than to leave Canada alone and leave our territories alone. Stop it. And the Americans sort of just basically want everyone to leave. In the scenario, wanted everyone to leave the Americas, but they haven't got that. I don't think it would be necessarily good for America. Historically, it does. I think it would lead to a lot of complications. As said, my strong instinct is that it would be Roosevelt who would win the 1904 election, and from that point onwards, he would be in power for probably as long as he could to rebuild the US Navy, to rebuild America, and to rebuild their standing on the international stage, because they will have lost so much. Because again, for the Americans, the shorter the war is, the worse it is for them. The less chance it gives them for them to deploy their industrial might and start building stuff up. But, you know, the point is, for them to build up to the levels at which we're talking about them dealing with here, and once you add in the French, the Russians, the Japanese, that's adding in more. Again, your newer ships will be better than the older ships there. True. But they're also building newer ships at the same time as you. They're starting off with a lot more of you than you. And are you going to be able to build ships everywhere that can take on those older ships? No. You're going to have limited numbers of those ships. Limited numbers of that available. That's the reality of the scenario you're dealing with. Legacy. Well, you see, if you've got a rapid American build-up in this period, and you've also got the Germans still following the naval laws, then what you're going to see Britain have to do is actually build a lot more, a lot quicker. They're going to have to take a different policy. I could see under this scenario, this could be the scenario where HMS Dreadnought gets the 14-inch Ellsworth guns rather than the 12-inch guns, where they jump. It could be the scenario where they take the risk on super-firing turrets from the get-go, rather than going for the armoured cruiser approach that a turret layout they've already developed. They might even go for the triple turrets. You could be talking about a Dreadnought which, unlike is a 24-knot ship, not a 21-knot ship, and has 15, 14-inch guns rather than 10, 12-inch guns, and a broadside of 15, 14-inch guns rather than 8, 12-inch guns. That is the sort of scenario you could be talking about, because A, this is going to have an impact, because there are going to be fights on development and on the technology and development going on into the promotion. It might even show the British there are problems with their shells and their armour piercing to an extent earlier. But what it's mostly going to have is it's going to mean the British are going to have to be dealing with two powers who are pushing on a quantitative as well as a qualitative route. And so that means the British are going to have to push a far heavier on the qualitative advantage to not have to spend as much on the quantitative advantage. So by using their advantage of their industry and the size and scope of their maritime naval industry and their research infrastructure especially, they can jump ahead. And if Dreadnought comes out, she's a 24-knot ship, she's got 15, 14-inch guns, that's going to have an ongoing repercussion for the rest. It's going to have an effect on the German construction, because that's going to be oh sugar, we've got 11-inch guns. None of our 11-inch guns are going to match in against 14-inch guns. We can claim that against 12-inch guns. We can't claim 11-inch versus 14-inch guns. And she's got 15 of them. So they would have to develop new turret designs, new layout, new guns. That's going to delay a lot of their production of their battleships. That's going to delay a lot of the work they can do. And to an extent that's similar for the Americans, because that's a big jump. And again, 24-knot ship. That's a big jump. And What I'm talking about is not technologically beyond what the British could have done in 1904 or 1904, 1905 if they hadn't been taking the most conservative approach ever known to mankind to taking an evolutionary jump in ship design. And it is an evolutionary jump, not a great leap forward. It's an evolution. And yeah, it's going to have an interesting legacy. I think what it might also do is lead to the British and British and American governments putting in some things into place which would mean it's even less likely to happen again in future. Because for both of them, war between them is too expensive and ultimately far more problematic than it's worth. Getting into a situation when there's war between Britain and America at any point from about 1880 onwards till about 1960 is not good for either side. Neither side is coming out of that well because of the soft and the hard power of both nations involved. So yeah, that's just one. Now, I always finish these videos with a question, and I know I've re-recorded this at home, but I still remember the question, which is this. Where do you think the naval battles would be? I've been thinking about this war. Do you think they would be off the coast of Venezuela, or do you think they'd be somewhere in the Caribbean? Because that's the interesting thing to me. Where do you think Dewey would pick for there to be a fight? Because he's going to be the one in charge of the largest American fleet. There's no doubt that. And therefore, he's going to be the one who's probably going to be picking which major squadron he tries to go up against. Now, early on, he can probably could have a fight with the forces of the coast of Venezuela, but again, I've mentioned there are forces sitting in the Caribbean. If they meet up with the forces of whatever remains from whatever was in Venezuela after the whatever harbour battle's taken place, and again, there are more British ships down there than there are American or German, with whatever survives of the German and Italian ships, where do you think that battle takes place? And that's going to be the first battle of the war. It's not going to be a decisive to its outcome. If the Allies win it, great. If they don't win it, oh, sad days. Here comes the raging horde across the Atlantic. But I'd like to hear where you think it happens and how you think it unfurls. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you again for all your support. None of this would be possible without you, without your super chats, without your super thanks, without your memberships on the channel, without the Patreon memberships and the people buying the stuff off the spreadshirt shop down below. All that stuff, that makes it possible. Makes it possible to buy a whole lot of books. Makes it possible for me to... Well, thanks to the Ko-fi donations I get, I make a lot of coffee donations to to librarians. Thank you for helping me find that file and find that book. Do you want a cup of coffee when we next get together? Yeah! When I'm next passing on uni, I'll take you for a cup of coffee. I owe so many cups of coffee at the moment. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. And yeah, what have we got coming up next week? 801 Squadron, Royal Navy. Ooh. And the Bow Guerrilla Attacker class, that's going to come out on Saturday. Because I decided I wanted to put a video out on Saturday. And because Monday and Tuesday, when I was trying to fix it, it just didn't work. So, I'm re-recording it. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care.